Thank you very much. The next item of business is a debate on motion 24300 in the name of Gillian Martin on the climate change plan. Can I invite members who wish to speak in this debate to press the request to speak buttons now? And I call on Gillian Martin to speak to and move the motion on behalf of the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move the motion in my name. As convener of the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee, I welcome the opportunity to highlight the committee's recent report on the updated climate change plan and move the motion on behalf of the 4 committees that have jointly considered the plan. This collaborative scrutiny and the need for immediate action across a broad range of Cabinet Secretary and committee remits demonstrates the cross-cutting and integrated nature of effective climate policy action and scrutiny. It's an approach that must continue if we are to realise our ambitions. That scrutiny process has been informed by the invaluable contributions of experts, stakeholders and communities from across Scotland and has been underpinned by our committee's work on a green recovery, and I would like to thank everyone who has contributed to our inquiry. Today represents an important opportunity to reflect on the strengths of the updated plan and to highlight some improvements needed to turn it into a credible and ambitious blueprint for Scotland's future. Our unanimously agreed report contains several action-focused recommendations, and we expect the Scottish Government to take these forward, together with those of the other committees, to deliver a final plan that we can all have confidence in. Sir David Attenborough recently told a virtual gathering of the UN Security Council that, and I quote, "Climate change is the biggest threat modern humans have ever faced." How we respond now will determine the world that our children and our grandchildren inherit. Parliament recognised the urgency of the situation in approving legislation that set new and ambitious targets. And it's clear that we need to increase and accelerate our action in the near term to meet them. Doing so offers clear potential for innovation, jobs, the economy, the environment, and for the well-being of the people of Scotland and beyond. We want to see Scotland at the forefront in exploring, developing and investing in these opportunities and in the technology that will help us reach our ambitious targets. That's why the updated plan must set the foundation and pathways for increased action across society. The committee recognises that we have very challenging targets and that the plan update has been prepared in challenging times. There's a significant level of support for the scale of the proposed emissions reductions and the overall ambition set out in the updated plan. In particular, we welcome the strengthened focus on cross-sectoral working and the inclusion of the coordinated approach, an approach that our committee has called for many years. However, we heard from our correspondents that detail on how to reach that ambition was lacking and that concerns were raised over the achievability of the plan as set out. Major action and transformational change across all sectors and all parts of society is now urgently required to reflect the nature of the climate emergency, meet our Climate Change Act ambition and to capture the immediate opportunities of a green recovery. We need to tackle the implementation gap, where solutions have already been identified but not so far applied. And we must capture and lock in positive behaviours and to build resilience through valuing nature more. Underpinning this all, we must focus on people, innovation, skills and jobs. The pandemic has shown that we can act boldly and quickly in the face of a crisis. But, as David Attenborough says, climate change is the biggest crisis facing humanity today, and our response must reflect that. Let me now move on to our recommendations, including those on the modelling and evidence used, the balance of effort across sectors, sectoral plans and governance arrangements, and on behaviour change. The committee has called on the Scottish Government to demonstrate how the policies and proposals deliver the envelopes presented for each sector. Understanding the relative emissions abatement significance of the policies and proposals is key to supporting the implementation of the plan, and this enables potential risks and deficiencies to be identified and corrected. We've also called for better clarity on the timescales associated with policy and proposal commitments in the plan to develop, consult, research or explore particular measures. The timescales should reflect the urgent nature of the climate emergency and the immediate opportunities to progress our green recovery. We would also like a review on the assumptions underpinning the plan, particularly the abatement attributed to negative emission technologies, or NETs. Given the uncertainties associated with this, we've called on the Scottish Government to set out an alternative plan for how equivalent abatement could be achieved. And we've also asked for greater detail on how the policies and proposals across all sectors reflect the opportunities and implications associated with just transition and green recovery, taking into account regional considerations. We've also recommended that the final updated plan must take a more integrated approach to cutting emissions across agriculture and land use, recognising that both depend on the management of a single resource and that these sectors are expected to become more closely aligned in policy and practice. The detail of our report makes clear and detailed recommendations across a range of other areas, including in waste and the circular economy, nature-based solutions and blue carbon. Now, the committee recognises that what we're debating today is an updated plan, and time for scrutiny has been tight, and updates are never going to be as comprehensive or detailed as a complete new plan. But I'd like to now look forward to the fourth climate change plan. First of all, stakeholders and the Parliament do need ample time to consider the detail contained in a new climate change plan, and the committee therefore calls on the Government to lay the next full climate change plan in Parliament by the end of 2023. And that will ensure that there is sufficient time for full stakeholder and parliamentary consideration before finalisation and publication of the fourth climate change plan in 2024. Now, this will be the last debate led by the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform in this parliamentary session, and it's fair to say that's the culmination of a very heavy work schedule in this session. It's been a privilege to convene a committee dealing with such vital work, and I'd like to pay tribute to the extremely hard work of the committee clerks and our Spice Research colleagues. And we also have two long-serving members of the committee retiring and making their last speeches today. That's Stuart Stevenson and Angus MacDonald. And I'd like to put on record my best wishes and thanks to them, as well as all the members who have served with such dedication on the committee throughout this session. And it's sad today that today was potentially the Cabinet Secretary's last debate as well, and she's unable to be here, but I wish her a speedy recovery and thank her for the constructive way she's worked with our committee and for her many years of public service, not least in her stewardship in protecting the environment and tackling climate change. Both our committee members and the Cabinet Secretary know that there is no precedent in human history for the speed and scale of change needed to tackle climate change and reduce harmful emissions. The changes highlighted across 4 parliamentary committees who've come together today will help to ensure that the final updated climate change plan proves an effective response to the current challenges, and our recommendations should help provide a springboard for the swift action needed to tackle climate change and to deliver a truly green recovery for Scotland, a recovery where no one is left behind, and it's only by committing to significant action today that we can build a better Scotland for tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Edward Mountain to speak on behalf of the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee. 6 minutes, Mr Mountain, to be followed by James Dornan.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. As convener of the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee, I'm pleased to contribute to this debate. We took evidence for the climate change plan during January and February of this year, and the committee's call for written evidence produced a good level of responses. I'm grateful to all those who contributed to the scrutiny process. Now, we wrote to the Scottish Ministers on the 4th of March, setting out a series of specific recommendations for improvement of the plan in areas covered by the committee's remit. Our work has been particularly important given that transport and agriculture sectors are the highest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in Scotland. On transport emissions, the objective of reducing transport emissions by 41% between 2020 and 2023 is certainly ambitious, particularly since these have not fallen over the last decade, Indeed, many stakeholders expressed doubt that this objective was achievable. To address these concerns, the committee has called on the Scottish Government to introduce enhanced monitoring, increased interim targets, and much greater clarity regarding the alignment of specific transport policy measures with the timescale for achieving the reduction in transport emissions. Probably the most significant transport-related element of the CCPU is the target to reduce car kilometres by 20% by 2030. The UK Climate Change Committee told us that even in its most ambitious assessment, it could not identify a set of policy measures that would achieve this level of reduction. Furthermore, the REC Committee has emphasised that particular challenges faced by remote and rural areas of Scotland in reducing car kilometres, given the limited availability of public transport and the slow rollout of electric vehicle charging infrastructure in these areas. Policy measures in the forthcoming route map for meeting this target will therefore need to be extremely ambitious and realistic in addressing these specific challenges. On electric vehicles, the planned phase out of new petrol and diesel vehicles, cars and vans to be achieved, it is critically important to address the current grid capacity constraints. The committee is urging the Scottish Government to set out a timescale for the complete phase-out of hybrid vehicles as well. On freight transport, we have heard evidence of the huge opportunity for reducing carbon emissions in freight transport by shifting from road to rail. We're therefore disappointed by a lack of emphasis on this in the plan and of addressing freight transport and harnessing that opportunity. On active travel, the increasing need to encourage active travel must be a key future priority, although I note that certain previous targets on active travel have been missed by a significant amount. We must therefore ensure that growth in active travel during the COVID-19 pandemic is embedded in the long-term psyche of the people of Scotland. On new rural policy, agricultural stakeholders have highlighted the lack of urgency in the timetable for bringing forward a new rural policy for Scotland and in rolling out regional land use partnerships. For planned reductions in carbon emissions from the agricultural sector to be achieved, these timescales must be significantly accelerated. On data research, training and advice, many... Yes, I will.
John Scott.
I thank Edward Mountain for taking an intervention and declaring an interest as a farmer. Would Edward Mountain agree with me that there's a huge willingness across Scotland in both the transport and agricultural sector to meet these challenges? However, would he also agree with me that there's a huge need for knowledge transfer for those who know how to make this work to those who will have to make this work? And that is a gap in the provision at the moment that needs to be filled.
Edward Mountain.
I thank Mr Scott for that intervention and timely reminding me as a farmer. I should also declare my interest in the fact that I want to see farming move forward. And I would like to say that Mr Scott is entirely right, because farmers need to be supported through the appropriately funded expansion of the Farm Advisory Service. In particular, we need to look at how we can increase the take-up of carbon audits quickly and significantly. On forestry, the UK Climate Change Committee gave notable praise to the targets and accompanying action plan for forestry. Our committee has concluded to maximise the environmental benefits of planting new woodlands. A 50-50 split between native and commercial species must be sustained in the long term. Beyond the current target of planting 18,000 hectares of new woodland annually by 2025, there is scope to achieve a longer-term target of 24,000 hectares per year, and the Scottish Government should develop a workable plan to achieve that goal. Sorry, Mr Lyle, did you want to interrupt?
Yes, Richard Lyle.
I actually wonder what England is doing, because I noticed that Scotland planted 80% of the total and England only planted 20% of the total.
Edward Mountain.
And Mr Lyle makes an important intervention if he was in the UK Parliament. We are in the Scottish Parliament, and I will concentrate on the Scottish Climate Plan. So, turning to food, stakeholders emphasise the importance of taking a whole food system approach to cutting emissions in the agriculture sector. The delayed Good Food Nation Bill would have provided an important framework for such an integrated approach, and this bill now needs to be brought forward urgently and no later than before the end of 2021. Now, Presiding Officer, in this brief summary, some of the key recommendations from the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee, and I hope the Scottish Government will give careful consideration to all the committee's recommendations. Presiding Officer, before I go, I will finish on this particular subject. The convener of the Eclair Committee mentioned that she was losing some members from her committee who had contributed. I too share losing Angus MacDonald and Stuart Stevenson, but I also will be sad to see Maureen Watt, Richard Lyle and John Finney go, as well as Peter Chapman. So I have perhaps been more remiss than the convener of the the Eclair Committee, because I have lost more members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on James Dornan to speak on behalf of the Local Government and Communities Committee, to be followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the opportunity to talk on behalf of the Local Government and Communities Committee about the draft Climate Change Plan update. Initially, we agreed to focus on the buildings chapter within the updated plan, and this centred around planning and building. Our scrutiny also looked at how local government plays a role in helping achieve the target. I'd like to take this opportunity to give my thanks to the committee's clerking team and to those who have given us written and oral evidence. And I also pay my tribute to the work of the fellow committees that scrutinise the updated plan who we are hearing from today. And I hope that there's none of my committee members that are leaving that I've forgotten to wish well in the future. I will point out that the committee took evidence before the Scottish Government released their draft heat and building strategy published in February. The strategy does shed light on some of the issues raised by the updated plan, and I also note the ongoing pandemic contributed to the delay in its publication. The breadth of ambition set out in the proposals, whilst recognised as challenging, is also one of the main strengths of the update. The proposals were well received and supported by our witnesses. However, we did hear that the updated plan lacked detail. Stakeholders and the public need to understand the stepping stones required to guide them towards the outcomes. Bringing down heat emissions from building is a challenging task, and the public play a vital role in tackling this. Clear, effective communication will help drive the behavioural change we need to see home by home. The committee welcomes the government's commitment to implement a public engagement strategy for heat decarbonisation. We believe people should feel informed and empowered, and that they can be part of the solution. The update states that the Scottish Government will introduce a standard requiring all new homes rented from 2024 to use zero emissions heating. But we hear of a time lag existing from when new regulations are introduced to when they start to have the effect on the ground. We've asked the Scottish Government to respond to views we heard that the date of the implementation of this standard should be brought forward to 2022. We understand a high percentage of modern buildings are failing to meet the minimum building standards regulations, and the current design life of a new home build is approximately 60 years. But past generations built home to last 100 and 200 years. We heard a proposal for a building's MOT for new builds, with emissions monitored at least every 5 years. The committee asked the Scottish Government to clarify what other opportunities are available to tighten up building standards and to ensure we build durable buildings. We understand the updated plan does not consider embodied energy. This is the total carbon footprint involved in construction or refurbishment, adding up the impact of labour, cement, steel, wood or other materials used, and all related transport impacts measured in carbon. The committee would be interested to know if the updated plan takes account of embodied energy costs. Once it is agreed that reducing the carbon footprint of existing homes is one of the biggest challenges under the plan. Scotland has a diverse range of homes, and much of this is older housing stock. Houses in rural areas bring particular challenges. We heard rural buildings are often seen as too difficult, too expensive, too hard or too complicated. With this comes the need for increased financial support, and we therefore welcome proposals to extend financial support in rural areas. We ask for more details on how homeowners will be incentivised and persuaded that improvements are in their interest. The committee also believes more detail is needed in the practicalities of rolling out improvements across Scotland's diverse housing stock. We heard evidence of improvements to homes which in fact made living conditions worse. We recognise introducing improvements as a developing discipline. However, witnesses welcome the emphasis on training and upskilling in the updated plan. The committee believes sharing good practice is essential to progress in this area. Scotland has around 800,000 tenement buildings, and we've noted the Scottish Government is committed to these tenements reaching a good level of energy efficiency. However, we believe law on common repairs in tenements must be reformed to help expedite interventions that will improve energy efficiency. We were disappointed to note that the 255-page plan has only one page expressly dedicated to planning. We were told the plan misses the point about the role of place, how people travel between and use those building accounts for a larger amount of green gas emissions than the buildings themselves. The committee therefore supports calls for a national policy focus on place, well-being and the delivery of related policy goods. We heard the current planning system must be adapted for it to become more reactive and a mechanism for flexible dialogue between the people, the developers and government. We recommend local authorities must be supported to provide effective public engagement and planning. As the nation moves towards a net zero society, the crucial role of local government in coordinating communities and public life must be recognised. We heard there's a need to upskill staff across all local authorities. This means not only funding, but also increased organisational capacity to meet this challenge. We've asked for a local government training strategy to upskill the workforce. And we welcome the commitment to work with local government to design solutions tailored to their circumstances. However, we also ask the government to consider increased flexibility of funding to also allow each local authority to meet the needs unique to their area in relation to decarbonisation. And finally, Presiding Officer, I look forward now to hearing the Ministers and the Cabinet Secretaries respond to the points raised by all committees and hope that many of these challenges will be addressed in the next parliamentary session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Willie Coffey to speak on behalf of the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee, to be followed by Ben McPherson.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to be speaking today on behalf of my committee. We considered three aspects of the climate change plan update: electricity, industry and NETs, that's the negative emissions technologies that have been mentioned earlier. I'd like to highlight a handful of points under each of these headings, if I may. First of all, I want to say something about an earlier piece of work that we did, because we reported on the findings of our energy inquiry last summer, and I believe the idea of the energy quadrilemma warrants repeating in this debate. It's crucial, we were told, to strike a balance between a quartet of potentially competing factors, those being climate change, security of supply, affordability and public acceptability, which basically means we should be asking ourselves where our energy comes from, how we use it, how responsible we are for what we consume. The aim here, of course, is to reduce carbon emissions and choose the best options available for us to achieve that. Scotland has almost halved its greenhouse gas emissions in 30 years, and that's really pretty good going. Now we just need to do it again in the next 11. That comes with challenges, Presiding Officer, but it brings opportunities too. The challenges for electricity take the form of planning, grid connection and charging. However, we have a number of comparative advantages as well. We have the workforce with oil and gas and renewables. We have natural assets, wind, hydroelectric, wave and tidal power. And we also have policy momentum with COP26 taking place in Glasgow later in the year. Key point from our evidence was the importance of alignment. Otherwise, we reduce the chances of renewable energy contributing to a green recovery. Now, a year ago, 3 of our committee members visited Orkney for our energy inquiry and witnessed the integration of generation, use and storage in the form of the Reflex project. What we would like to see now in terms of monitoring is a tool within the annual energy statement. And we suggest that statement could be a standalone document, one that can show progress made in a meaningful, prominent and accessible way for policymakers, parliamentarians and the public too. When it came to industry, Presiding Officer, it was disappointing not to hear directly from INEOS. The company is such a significant player in the sector. That was not to be, but we did hear on its behalf from the Chemical Industries Association. Now, they told us about the high operational costs of decarbonising, and they were blunt about the risks of carbon leakage. Leakage not in the technical sense, but the potential economic loss if businesses and jobs were to move elsewhere. That is just the economics of it, they reminded us. We recommend, therefore, that the Scottish Government prioritise this aspect of its policy around incentive, support and competitiveness, and that it continues to work in partnership with the industry. We also encourage our successor committee next session focus on industrial decarbonisation. Third and final strand of our work, Presiding Officer, was on negative emissions technologies. These are technologies that can permanently remove carbon from the atmosphere, and it's fair to say expectations on this front are ambitious. Chris Stark reckoned what was being set out by the Scottish Government was entirely feasible, but subject to there being significant investment and political and commercial willpower. He said that developments would have to happen at scale and a Scottish site needed to be established by 2029. We were told Scotland has the geology, the skills and the infrastructure, and so we're well placed to lead on this. However, some of our evidence voiced concern at what was seen as the lack of an alternative strategy. Our Minister, Mr Wheelhouse, sought to balance risks and rewards between government, industry and consumers, and he spoke of a place-based approach. A number of witnesses said the cost of decarbonisation should be spread fairly across society, and Mr Wheelhouse stressed the importance of partnership working. He praised initiatives such as the Grangemouth Future Industry Board, the Scottish Industrial Decarbonisation Partnership and the North East Carbon Capture, Usage and Storage Initiative, or NECUS to its friends. But our committee welcomes the importance placed upon these partnerships. Business and community buy-in must be an essential part of our plans, but we would like to see a little more detail on the 2032 target for gross emissions. And we recommend the Scottish Government prepare and publish an industrial roadmap that will take us there. So these were just a few of our own findings, Presiding Officer, and I hope they chime with the findings of our other committees, and I look forward to hearing more later this afternoon, and of course hearing from the Government as the debate winds up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Ben McPherson on behalf of the Scottish Government, to be followed by Liz Smith.
Good afternoon, Presiding Officer, and I am also glad to speak in this important debate on the Climate Change Plan update, and also thank the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee for sponsoring today's debate, and for all the committees that have been involved in the scrutiny process, and indeed for 4 important speeches from the conveners this afternoon. Firstly, as Gillian Martin alluded to, I would like to start by acknowledging that the Cabinet Secretary is unfortunately unable to be here, having been unwell recently. But don't worry, for clarity, it's not COVID. Rosanna, more than anyone, will be suitably annoyed at having to miss Parliament, not just because this might well have been her final debate and speeches before her retirement, but because the Climate Change Plan update is something she has championed for the last few years. Her commitment to delivering on our ambitious targets is second to none. And so, although she cannot be here today, I think the whole chamber would acknowledge the contribution she has made to getting us this far. Presiding Officer, Scotland has made great progress in reducing our emissions. The Committee on Climate Change recently highlighted that we have decarbonised faster than the rest of the UK and any G20 economy since 2008. In 2019, we enshrined in law world-leading targets, including net zero emissions by 2045, and committed to update the 2018 Climate Change Plan. However, none of us could have imagined back then the circumstances in which this update would be published. COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on lives and livelihoods across Scotland, as we know. However, there are brighter times ahead. And out of the pandemic, we must secure a green recovery and a just transition to net zero. Because, of course, the global climate emergency has not gone away. If anything, it has become an even more pressing issue. And it reminds me of when I was in China in 2003, when the first SARS pandemic hit. And I heard a saying that was, "The virus is the greatest concern to humankind, except for humankind itself." And I think that really epitomises the situation that we're in now with regard to our focus on the climate emergency as well as the pandemic. The plan we're considering today, the plan update, sets an ambitious path to meet Scotland's targets up to 2032, including 100 new policies, in line with the requirements of Section 36 of the Climate Change Act. The policy package was also designed to make up for the excess emissions that arose from the missed 2017 and 2018 annual targets. The plan update was signed by all Cabinet Secretaries, the whole of the Cabinet, reflecting the cross-government approach recommended by the ECCLR Committee. Furthermore, our new coordinated approach chapter accounts for the interlinkages between sectors. And given the complexities involved, the plan update commits to learning by doing, as recommended by our stakeholders. It refreshes the monitoring framework from the 2018 plan, and annual reporting to Parliament on progress will begin in May. We have also included an additional sector chapter for negative emissions technologies, which reflects our recognition, in line with the advice of the CCC, that these technologies will be essential. Most importantly, though, our new and boosted policies and proposals will reduce emissions across all sectors. Indeed, while giving evidence at committee, Chris Stark of the CCC said that the plan update is really impressive in breadth, noting there is no UK equivalent. The transition to net zero will require many transformational shifts that need to take place in the next decade. Therefore, the plan update commits us to significant immediate action. For example, our farmer-led groups will secure uptake of low-emissions farming measures. We are rapidly implementing the beef sector group's recommendations, and the groups on arable, dairy and hill, upland and crofting are aiming to report in the spring. Last month, we announced our regional land use partnership pilot regions to optimise land use in a fair and inclusive way, and we have also increased our ambition with regards to nature-based solutions, with targets to restore 20,000 hectares of peatland per annum and increase new woodland creation by 50% by 2025. Furthermore, we will reduce car kilometres by 20% by 2030 and will seek to publish a strategy on this later this year. We will also ensure that by 2030, half of our homes have transitioned to low and zero carbon heating systems, with the recent Heat and Buildings strategy laying out our delivery plans in more detail. And in the waste sector, we will reduce food waste by 33% by 2025. The commitments in the plan update are backed up by record levels of funding, including £1.9 billion announced in the budget. This includes the first £165 million of our Low Carbon Fund, with £14 million for the Green Jobs Fund, £25 million for bus priority infrastructure and £15 million for zero emissions buses. We also recently published our infrastructure investment plan, supporting an inclusive net zero carbon economy and detailing over £26 billion of major projects and large programmes. And the publication of the plan update, of course, comes at a timely moment for climate action worldwide. Ahead of COP26 in Glasgow, we have the opportunity to showcase Scotland's world-leading approach to climate change, and we will use COP26 to help drive tangible international climate action. Presiding Officer, colleagues, though there will undoubtedly be uncertainties as we transition to net zero, technological advances, the limits of devolution, and the need to ensure a just transition, we are confident that the plan update provides a credible pathway to meeting our targets. It sends out a clear statement of intent, providing greater certainty for all parts of society to contribute further to mitigating climate change. I want to thank the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee for their report and recommendations, alongside those of the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee, the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee and the Local Government and Communities Committee. This progress is invaluable. We, the Scottish Government, will consider this advice and respond in due course, bearing in mind that there is an urgent need to finalise the plan update so that we can focus on the implementation of its policies and deliver our targets, including reducing emissions by 75% by 2030. We therefore plan to finalise the current plan update before recess. We will then look for opportunities to integrate additional policies into our overall package in due course, and this includes any new policies in response to our full consideration of the committee's recommendations, as well as the outcome of our review into the impact of technological updates to the measurement of emissions from wetlands. And Ministers will make a statement in June following the publication of the next set of greenhouse gas emission statistics, and we will look for other opportunities to keep Parliament informed of our approach. So, Presiding Officer, I hope what I've said is useful in setting out the Scottish Government's positions and approach, and we look forward to continuing to work with fellow MSPs and others, and I look forward to the rest of today's debate. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Liz Smith to be followed by Claudia Beaming.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I begin by offering the good wishes from the Conservatives for a very speedy recovery to Rosanna Cunningham. But can I also say, given that this would have been her last debate, that I also would like to pay tribute to her over a long period of time. We come from extremely different political stables, as I think everybody knows, but we've been adversaries in Perthshire for quite some time. She is a formidable politician, and I think she's given great service to both Westminster and to Holyrood over the time. So I wish her a very happy retirement. Deputy Presiding Officer, I think we would all accept that this has been all too easy during the pandemic to forget about the enormity of the challenge which we face when it comes to tackling climate change. And it is the scale of that challenge, together with the worryingly short timescales, which has focused the minds of several committees in this chamber over recent months. And it is also why the report is fairly blunt from the Eclair Committee in its analysis of the work that the next Parliament will have to do. Chris Stark, who's already been mentioned, is definitely one of the most respected advisers on climate change, and he described the Scottish Government's ambitions as being on, and I quote, the fringes of credibility. And I agree with Chris Stark on that point, but that's not to say that the Scottish Government's ambitions are wrong. Far from it. But there are serious question marks over the deliverability of certain key targets, most especially if we look at some of the SNP's most recent record. So it is that question over deliverability which we will be concentrating on in this debate. There are key issues which need to be addressed if Scotland, when it comes to COP26 in a few months' time, is going to be able to demonstrate that she is a world leader when it comes to addressing climate change. Firstly, the strong message coming from many of the witnesses that we heard, and which is highlighted by the Eclair Committee, is that much more has to be done to drive a holistic policy approach, the one that was described by the Minister. Too much of the climate change debate has been taking place within different silos, perhaps that's understandable, and I provide just 3 examples of that. Firstly, we know that there have been very significant differences in progress to net zero within the 8 sectors. For example, the water industry and domestic heat and buildings have been doing very well, but transport much less so. Has enough been done to ascertain why certain sectors have been making more progress than others? Probably not, although I do accept the Cabinet Secretary's recent remarks that some of the difference was down to the different pace of technological change. That's a fair comment, but it is not the whole story. For example, if we accept that green transport is a key priority, and I've heard the Cabinet Secretary say this many times, particularly in relation to buses, then I do question why the SNP would decide to cut 33 million out of this year's rail infrastructure budget. That doesn't make sense to me. Secondly, we heard quite a lot of criticism at committee about the absence of a universal approach to regional land partnerships, something which has consistently been raised by the NFUS. They felt that there was too much of a disjointed approach to agriculture and forestry and questioned why the regional land partnerships policy had to be on a pilot basis only, when it's quite clear that there has been very successful elsewhere, delivering substantial improvements in biodiversity and financial economies of scale. And thirdly, concerns have been raised about the ability to link urban and rural policy. Several witnesses made the point that they felt climate change plan did not reflect the needs of different regions sufficiently well, and I think that's something we need to address as soon as possible. Without any question, priority has to be placed on the introduction of the Circular Economy Bill promised by the SNP as a flagship piece of legislation. That bill is absolutely critical to the climate change plan, so it was disappointing that it had to be delayed, and I'm sure my colleague Maurice Golden will say a bit more about this in his summing up. Let me turn now to what I see as some of the more difficult and pressing challenges we face, challenges with which the Eclair Committee has been wrestling over recent weeks. Firstly, there is the issue of behaviour change and how easy it will be to deliver this change with the encouragement and incentives rather than by more punitive measures. We all know that consumer behaviour has to change if we are to hit more climate change targets. And we may already have done some of what's necessary to reduce the use of plastic, to improve the heating in our homes, to ensure that we're buying greener cars, to address some problems of landfill, but there is an awful lot more to be done. And that's where I think things get difficult. To what extent, for example, should we be taxing consumers in order to effect the changes that we want to see? To what extent should government dictate to us what expectations there are on consumer behaviour? And to what extent should economic policy become more statist in its approach? Should there be continuing conflicts between the private and public sectors? These are all very complex issues, raising questions about tax revenues, procurement, indeed the role of government in society, and we can't run away from them. The committee has touched on most of these issues, but I do think that the next Parliament is going to have to take this forward. Secondly, there is the issue of striking a balance, and nowhere is this more important in our approach to nature. We should acknowledge the huge progress that has been made in many respects, and I pay tribute to the Cabinet Secretary again for her own efforts, particularly with peatlands, but there are some very worrying features of this debate too. And I will put on record here my very deep-seated concern at the way that a small minority of so-called environmentalists have attacked many whose lifeblood is the countryside. The recent attacks on gamekeepers, on gillies, on stalkers, for doing their job in maintaining and enhancing our countryside have been reprehensible, just as have been the comments from a small minority who quite clearly ignore our responsibility to outlaw raptor crime. The approaches of these small but nonetheless very vocal minorities are born out of prejudice and ignorance, and I deplore the lack of reasoned debate, often flouting the available evidence about the activities they undertake, most especially those when they have done so much to improve biodiversity. The same is true for the stewardship of our beauty spots. Scotland is so rich in its natural assets, and if there has been any silver lining within the very dark COVID cloud, it is that many people want to enjoy them. But that comes with responsibility, and that means much tougher action to weed out the fly tippers, the litter louts and the antisocial campers. Presiding Officer, the scale of the climate change challenge we face is immense. And I wonder sometimes if this Parliament, if we've been devoting enough time in the Chamber to debating climate change policy. I appreciate that the pandemic has made similar demands on debating time, but I look at some of the debates that we've had and I wonder just if we've got our priorities right. A debate about which flags we fly outside this building would surely have been one of them that we could have done without. And so I hope in the next Parliament we will be able to prioritise much more on climate change, far more than has been the case in this Parliament.
Thank you very much. I now call Claudia Beamish to be followed by Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start by wishing the Cabinet Secretary well, as others have already, in every sense of the word. It is indeed unfortunate that she cannot be here to take part in today's debate, it possibly being her last, and I pay Scottish Labour's respects to her long-standing contribution to this brief. I also want to wish Sarah Boyack well in her new post as our spokesperson for climate change, environment and land reform. May I say that her acumen and experience, in my view, on all these fundamentally significant issues will serve Scotland well. Today she will be focusing on the role of local government leadership and funding. Richard Leonard will tackle the issue of just transition and jobs, and probably, I hope as well, how the skills strategy is vital. We must not miss the opportunities as we slowly move out of COVID. We are indeed in a declared climate emergency and a nature emergency which is inextricably linked to this. There is an urgent need for rapid, clearly planned action across all sectors to meet the 2030 targets fairly, but the Scottish Government simply is not clear enough on the detail of many of its policies. I and other members will come to this from both committee and party perspectives, and indeed some have already. However, I want to start by focusing on the global imperative. Today, at the Eclair Committee, of which I'm a member, we took evidence from the Scottish Government team working on Scotland's involvement in the Glasgow Summit, COP26. I want to make some brief comments about this opportunity and stress how fundamentally important the framing is. This is fundamentally our collective deliberations about the climate change plan. But I have to say that the Climate Change Act of 2019 was strengthened by some of Scottish Labour's amendments and those of others in relation to the Global South and our responsibility as a developed nation to pay our fair share. And also there was an expectation in the Act that how to reference the regard to the climate justice principle. And vitally, I quote from the Act, proposals and policies for supporting, including by sharing of expertise and technology, action in developing countries to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases and adapt to the effect of climate change. And I'm going to quote from one of our comments from the Eclair Committee, of which I'm a member. While the committee recognises it is an update to the 2018 climate change plan and therefore we're not legally bound to incorporate the requirements set out in the Act, the committee expected the Scottish Government would seek to reflect these provisions as far as it was possible to do so. The committee is concerned that the draft climate change plan update does not include a number of these actions as identified in the 2019 Act. I hope the Minister will take note of this today and these concerns will be expressed in the final updated plan. I now turn to our recommendations on blue carbon. Our convener, Gillian Martin, in her letter to the Cabinet Secretary on the 4th of March on publication of our report, pointed out, and I quote, "The committee notes that the plan is now being prepared in the run-up to COP26 in November, where international emissions targets will be reviewed. Prior to this, I strongly ask that the Scottish Government push the case with the UK Government for the inclusion of blue carbon in the inventory, as per our recommendation from the committee 192. And I quote, it would appear to the committee that acting on the basis of the precautionary principle, taking a proactive approach to blue carbon and including it as part of the the climate change plan update would ensure that, Scotland makes early advances and secures multiple benefits in terms of carbon storage, securing biodiversity and supporting adaptation and resilience in many areas that are relatively simple, low-cost actions. And I hope the Minister and indeed the Cabinet Secretary will take this on board. She has shown robust leadership in the development of peatland action, and I hope that this will be the case with blue carbon as well. We don't have to wait. And a brief comment on peat to pass to the Cabinet Secretary, please. That our recommendation 162 provides further detail on the mechanisms that should be used to phase out the use of horticultural peat, on the assessment of how existing sites for peat extraction will impact on land use and that envelope, and emphasises a presumption against extensions to existing sites. I turn now to the issue of incineration and energy from waste, and I ask the Scottish Government to explore this issue with great care, as is highlighted by the committee. Our recommendation 129 states, review and coordinate the planning and procurement of incineration capacity to avoid lock-in. And I stress, it is, at its most simple, no more capacity, no more demand. And in a more positive vein, I turn to the circular economy, so important in the future of our jobs for Scotland and the climate change plan. And our 128 recommendation include a recommitment to the circular economy bill to set out a framework for a transition to a circular economy. So, finally, Chris Stark, who I also refer to and greatly respect, suggested that while the Scottish ministers have responded to the principles that the Climate Change Committee set out and to their recommendations, this does not go far enough. And the response needs to be framed to the economic crisis we are facing as we come out of the pandemic to ensure that we achieve a green recovery. So to this I would simply add, finally, the evidence of the global threat is stark. Let's do all we can here in Scotland to help keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees and lead by example in the run-up to COP26. A really robust climate change plan update with route maps in all sectors, underpinned by a just transition, could do just this. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Liam MacArthur to be followed by Mark Ruskell.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I offer my good wishes to all those members for whom this is their final parliamentary debate and share the disappointment that the Cabinet Secretary cannot be with us participating this afternoon. She has not only shown a commitment to the climate change, but as Liz Smith reminded us, has always been a minister who has been approachable and collaborative in her approach. And while I learnt the hard way the risks of taking an intervention from Stuart Stevenson, and I've not entirely forgiven him for redirecting one of Orkney's lifeline ferries off to Norway. I feel strangely privileged to be here for his final contribution and look forward to the remarkable word count that I'm sure he will appraise us of later on this afternoon. Deputy Presiding Officer, can I also offer thanks to all 4 committees for their diligence in robustly scrutinising this updated plan. The reports capture a vast amount of knowledge, expertise and experience from a wide range of witnesses, to whom I also offer thanks. As a result, today's debate, I think, can only really aspire to being a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully these reports provide reassurance that this Parliament recognises the importance, the urgency and the scale of the challenge at hand. Indeed, as the Local Government Committee observed, the word challenge hardly seems sufficient. I also find myself in agreement with the Eclair Committee colleagues in welcoming the greater emphasis in the updated plan of the role for nature-based solutions. This is something Scottish Liberal Democrats strongly support. For all the innovative technologies we must and will invest in, a diverse ecosystem offers the surest means of storing carbon and reducing emissions. Moreover, the potential for green job creation through restoration and management work is significant. RSPB estimate around 8,500 full-time equivalent jobs could be created, and this is an opportunity, therefore, that cannot be passed up. But the Eclair Committee also warned that 1 million hectares of peatland are degraded in some form or other. The committee goes on to express concern, quite rightly, that historically the Scottish Government has had greater success in reaching tree planting targets than reaching peatland restoration targets. I'm sure Mr Lyle will update us on the UK Government's performance there, but for obvious reasons, Presiding Officer, that needs to change. The lack of multi-year funding is perhaps a more recognised and well-established problem, and in the face of a climate emergency, we cannot miss targets and opportunities through an inability to plan, a lack of certainty and an overabundance of bureaucracy. Can I also associate myself with the important points made by the Local Government Committee colleagues about linking work to eradicate fuel poverty with efforts to reduce the carbon footprint of housing and buildings. This was a theme, of course, that was picked up during the passage recently of the Heat Networks Bill. Orkney is one of 7 local authorities with significantly higher fuel poverty and extreme fuel poverty rates well beyond the national average. Despite the government declaring energy efficiency a national priority before the last election, we seem no closer to addressing this persistent scar on so many of our communities. I'm pleased the committee underlined that retrofitting existing housing to reduce overall emissions would be one of the biggest challenges. It will be difficult in Orkney and other rural and island areas. For different reasons, it will be a tall order in our cities too. There are 800,000 tenement households across Scotland. Coordinating work to reduce emissions in this part of the housing stock will be, bluntly, a logistical nightmare. It will require clear communication from the government and accessible support services to help people make informed choices about the options available and how best to act. Unfortunately, as the Energy Saving Trust observed, quote, there is low general awareness among the population of the need to improve the energy efficiency of their homes and to switch away from conventional heating, as well as very low awareness of how people can take action. Without improving public awareness, the ambitions contained in the plan are at risk of just being a pipe dream. Indeed, Sam Foster told the committee that 95% of modern buildings fail to satisfy current minimum building standard regulations on energy efficiency. If anywhere close to accurate, this is a truly alarming statistic. The need for coherent, coordinated and focused change was a theme throughout each committee's work. This was perhaps exemplified during the Energy Committee's visit to Orkney, where members saw firsthand the value of taking a whole systems approach. I've spoken before about the impressive forward-thinking Reflex project underway in Orkney and of which I am now a member. Reflex will match what we can sustainably produce with what consumers actually need, and I wholeheartedly agree with the Energy Committee's call, and indeed Willie Coffey's call, for government to deliver on the lessons from that project. I referred earlier to the opportunities of job creation, and we see the potential for this in so many aspects of the fight against climate change. It will take time, of course, to build and adapt our workforce to meet the challenging demands, but people are raring to go, looking for opportunities and the right signals and support from government. The oil and gas sector is brimful of people with invaluable knowledge, skills and expertise. Many recognise the need to transition to sustainable alternatives. Indeed, Friends of the Earth found that 81% said they would consider switching to another sector. But as the Energy Committee heard in evidence, the experience of just transition hasn't been much felt on the ground to date. Job losses at key sites mean that, and I quote, the experience to date demonstrates that promises of green jobs and positive outcomes are easily broken without the concrete policy action to deliver. It shows the importance of having a climate change plan able to turn fine words into meaningful action. We need a route map for every sector and every area, costed, funded and realistic, not another list of excuses as to why work went elsewhere. And Deputy Presiding Officer, we can't start soon enough. Again, I welcome today's debate, thank the committees for their hard work and hope to be in a position to continue contributing to efforts to turn these aspirations into action. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Mark Ruskell, after which we will move to the open debate.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I start by joining other members in wishing Cabinet Secretary Rosanna Cunningham all the very best. I hope that she makes a speedy recovery and that she's able to join us again for the final days of this session of Parliament. And I'd also like to thank all of those who've given evidence throughout these inquiries on the Climate Change Plan update during what I think has been quite challenging times. And I'd also personally like to thank the clerks of the Aclara Committee and SPICE for their support given to myself and other colleagues over the last 5 years. There will not be a single legislature or government anywhere in the world that can say that they've done enough to tackle the climate emergency. And it is our moral duty to go faster and further, especially for the sake of those who will suffer the most, but have contributed the least to causing this crisis. And in that context, Parliament was right to set an ambitious target of at least 75% cut in emissions by 2030, because these next 9 years will make or break the climate. But any idea that we could reach this target by simply creating a more energy-efficient version of 2020 is misguided. Halving emissions over the last 30 years was the start, but halving them again in the next 9 years requires a total change of mindset. It will require system change to tackle climate change, to make choices easier, from leaving the car at home to scrapping a gas boiler or reducing meat consumption. And this updated plan ducks many of those challenges because it is just an update, a stopgap. It doesn't fully answer the question that Parliament asked government about how it could achieve the 2030 target. The additional effort demanded by that target is simply divvied out to all sectors evenly, except farming and industry, who are largely let off. And the Cabinet Secretary admitted in committee that the update is not designed to be encyclopedic, but for the sake of the planet, at this point, it needs to be. And that's why I attempted to amend the bill, the climate bill, to require a full plan to be produced early on. But we'll now have to wait until 2023 for the real deal to hopefully emerge. The only area where the plan takes a leap of faith, and it's a huge leap of faith, is on technologies which could extend the life of the oil and gas sector in its current form. The negative emissions technologies, especially carbon capture and storage, which is so costly and uncertain, is relied on almost unquestioningly in this plan. The government has put all its chips on CCS to deliver a cut of nearly a quarter of Scotland's emissions by 2030. Even waste incinerators are planned to have CCS bolted on. Presiding Officer, this is a fantasy. Neither is it a just transition, because there simply is no transition. It's business as usual for the sector that has been licensed to nearly quadruple oil and gas extraction in the North Sea, a move that is as incompatible with the Paris Agreement today as it will be with the Glasgow Agreement in November. The reality is illustrated by Mossmoran, Scotland's third largest emitter. The operators have no plans for CCS. The plant creaks along, and the promise of a Just Transition Board to plan for the future with the community has been repeatedly sidelined. Even the cross-party meeting promised to me by the First Minister from October last year has been kicked into the long grass. And every time there is delay, we let down the workers and the communities of the future because we risk deferring collapse rather than planning now for a transition that is just and leaves no one behind. So there has to be a plan B on these negative emissions technologies that is not written by the oil and gas sector. And the good news is that we're sitting on the European jackpot of renewable wind and tidal resources. Technologies from heat pumps to pump storage are cost-effective, well understood and deployable now. Green hydrogen will have a strong role to play for heavy industry and transport. And there is a need to double down on the progress Scotland has made with onshore wind, accelerate the rollout of offshore wind and tidal, while treating energy efficiency as the national infrastructure priority of this decade. And on transport, as with so many areas, there's a need for clearer implementation plans which show the reduction in emissions linked to policies and budget. Now, it is welcome that the Scottish Government is now planning for traffic reduction rather than growth, but it will be impossible to achieve this when the infrastructure investment plan is aiming to spend 3 times more on high carbon than low carbon transport. Far better to not build an unnecessary road in the first place than to spend decades wondering what to do with the traffic growth that it has generated. And for those reasons, the decision by Stirling Council to drop the Viewforth Link Road last week was the right one. Every new road capacity project, right up to the A96, now needs to be re-evaluated in the light of the climate emergency. Budgets must be climate-proofed because Parliament can't tell at the moment what the long-term impacts will be of this capital spend. And while some areas such as farm subsidies are locking in the harmful ways of the past, when they should be delivering the solutions to the climate and nature emergencies. Presiding Officer, I hope that this session's last debate on climate change leaves the right questions, the lessons and demands for the next government and Parliament, because our futures depend on it.
Thank you very much, Mr Ruskell. And the open debate, I now call Stuart Stevenson to be followed by Jamie Halcrow-Johnson. Mr Stevenson's final speech in the chamber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's always as well to get the applause in first because it may not be so enthusiastic at the end. As I prepare for my departure from this place, I wonder in particular what issue I would wish to remain engaged with after I leave Parliament. But before I do that, I want to single out the official report for so masterfully converting some of my more obscure contributions into something approximating to readable English, and for being persuaded to accept the majority of my suggested changes to their drafts, especially accepting a new word created by Bruce Crawford and me, "cum snuggert," the noun for being overwhelmed by information. Not all my previous 852 speeches have been of equal intelligibility, and the people in the OR are the all but invisible heroes of our institution, and I give them my very heartfelt thanks. Now, clearly, as I've been campaigning for our country's independence since joining the SNP in November 1961, I will remain on that issue. But independence is not an end in itself. It is about having the power to serve wider purposes. We're not entirely powerless on the subject of climate change, but we're allowed to be at the top table of decision makers only occasionally and at the whim of different ministers of the UK. The signs are good for COP26 in that regard, let me hasten to say. I was privileged to have led the UK team from time to time during international conferences such as the COP14, 15 and 17 that I attended. Colleagues have not always been as fortunate. Now, the update of our climate change plan that is the subject of today's debate is another example of our shared determination to leave the world fit for purpose for those who will live after we do. But the update is, of course, not the last word on the subject. The full plan must arrive in relatively early course. And the needs to describe the means to the end that we all, I believe, share and provide the resources for public agencies' contribution to delivering it. Two foci, I suggest, are particularly important. A just transition for those currently working in industries that contribute to global warming. Very important for the area I represent, where oil and gas is employing perhaps 20% of people who work there. But we have the skills and determination to be part of the vanguard to a new energy. We're already travelling that road as renewable energy has increased in importance. Government policy must support private enterprise to create the new jobs which will supplant the old. Secondly, we must play our part in delivering climate justice. We created the aridity, heat, flooding and storms which affect many who cannot afford to fix the problem. I think of farmers in Africa in particular, and that's a gender issue because many of the farmers most worst affected by that are female. Finally, let me leave this place, as you would expect, by recognising the various contributions of others like myself who plan to leave, and one in particular who plans to stay. In doing so, I recognise that no single person or political party has a monopoly of wisdom. Now, my list is a fairly random list that recognises that everyone who shares our belief in democracy, which is essentially an understanding that we can be dismissed from office or denied office by the decisions of the people we represent, has the opportunity to make a contribution of value. Looking at the Tory benches, I greatly miss Alec Johnson and Alec Ferguson, who departed untimely before their time. Great friends of me and great friends of Parliament. One of my cousins was a Conservative councillor. Yes, it's time for admissions. Dr. Sandy Patterson was his name, and being a GP was his game. To my right, Mary Fee has been both radical in her ideas while being moderate and engaging in her expression of them. I served under her on the subcommittee on policing and admired how she conducted herself in that role. Her colleague David Stewart has distinguished himself to very good effect on the subject of road safety, and I can't imagine an occasion when I disagreed with anything you had to say on that. So thank you to you both. My niece, Morag, a music teacher, is chair of her local Labour Party in Kent. John Finney on the Green benches has been a reasoned and reasonable voice for Green issues, and I've rarely disagreed with him on matters of principle. Now, here's the one you don't expect, and I'm sorry it's not you, Liam MacArthur. It is Mike Rumbles. He has contributed much in his time here, and he's a man of focus and principle, and one whose frustration I felt when I gave him a one-word answer on AWPR funding to an exceptionally lengthy question that I was given as Minister from him. Ministers have the occasional licence to misbehave. John Swinney, who was sitting beside me, muttered, "Never do that again, Stuart." My great-uncle, Sir Alexander Stuart Stevenson, was Liberal Lord Provost of Edinburgh and has 6 streets named after him. He was responsible for the erection of the statues to William Wallace and Robert the Bruce that you pass between as you go into Edinburgh Castle, but he had rather more substantial achievements. Now, as a genealogist of some 60 years standing, I frequently referred to my relatives, and why should today be any different? My father's cousin, Lord James Stevenson, was, like me, a politician, a crossbencher in the House of Lords, appointed by Ramsay MacDonald as a reward for delivering the Empire exhibition in 1924, which incidentally provided England with its national football stadium at Wembley. They only got it because of the actions of a Scotsman from Kilmarnock. I reveal that his coat of arms was supported by squirrels rampant and has the motto beneath the shield, "Carry on." Is it the end of my family connection to elected politics? No, we shall carry on. I do, of course, leave a very different Parliament from the one I joined in 2001. I've just looked at my statistics, and I will, by the end of this session, have attended 110 virtual committee meetings. That's how much things have changed. It's now time for me to leave, Presiding Officer, and another MSP and me to come out together. I hand my political baton to my cousin, a person with whom I share 11 centimorgans of DNA, a person who's already a government minister and a respected and energetic local member of Parliament. So good luck in the election, Minister. With a final ping of my Galaxies that I know she admires so much, I now hand my share of family responsibility for political service to a fellow admirer of such luridity, my cousin, Jenny Gilruth.
I now call Jamie Halcrow-Johnson to be followed by Angus MacDonald. Mr Halcrow-Johnson, please.
Well, it seems a little unfair to have to follow that, Presiding Officer, but thank you. Can I add my best wishes to all those who are retiring from this place, and particularly to Stuart Stevenson after that fantastic speech. When I made my maiden speech here, he rather, with I think some regret, noted that he thought I'd beaten his record for the quickest maiden speech after being sworn in. But it's always safe to say that we learn something from Stuart Stevenson when he speaks, not always in relation to the subject being debated, but I do remember again as he mentioned Alex Ferguson and Alex Johnston, 2 people that we all miss. He suggested that I had the stature of Alex Johnston. I'm not sure he meant politically or not, but I better move on to the subject. Can I firstly remind members of my register of interests in relation to being a partner in a farming business. And can I also give my thanks to the committees and their teams, particularly the Clare Committee, for bringing forward today's debate, and the REC Committee, on which I sit, for its own work around the climate change plan. This is a year where, like no other, Scotland's commitments around climate change will have a global stage. The United Kingdom will be hosting the COP26 summit in Glasgow in under just 10 months' time. And it'll be a space for real global work on climate change commitments, bringing the world together to tackle one of the most pressing issues of our time. Sadly, it will be against the backdrop of a coronavirus pandemic that has dominated virtually every part of our politics for the past year. But the coming months and years ahead must be a time for recovery from the pandemic and its unprecedented effect on the global economy. And we must, as I'm sure we all believe, meet the promises of a green recovery head-on. In doing so, we should be looking not only to improve those areas of the economy which will have to be rebuilt, but also to start making real progress in those areas where existing climate change reduction work has not made the impact that it must. The agriculture sector has been forthright in calling for a real future plan for rural Scotland, something that has been kicked down the road. Like most in our sector, I appreciate the need to change and to build a carefully managed transition to a lower carbon rural economy. And that transition will recognise that change cannot come overnight without serious consequences. But equally, we should not hide behind transition to justify painfully slow progress. The government must also recognise that efforts to transition are completely undermined by what the Clare Committee has cited as substantially lacking absence of detail on how targets will be met, and a future policy direction that is all but blank. What this creates is a credibility gap between targets and achievement, and it doesn't take long to realise that the Scottish Government has form here. Legally binding emissions targets breached, recycling pledges on course to be broken, targets for a low level of renewable heat use missed dramatically, targets for clean air in the cities ignored. Add to all of this cuts in the budget to programmes designed to improve the sustainability of farming and the rural economy, and you end up with an incredibly disappointing ability to grasp the issue. The climate change plan update is at least welcome, but the Scottish Government cannot pretend it contains a viable route map to the sort of transformational change that is required. And in this year where the spotlight is on Scotland, can we really trust that what the Scottish Government continually calls its ambitious targets will be met under the current administration? My region, the Highlands and Islands, faces many challenges in meeting these ambitions. We have greater reliance on cars, we have a greater focus on agriculture. Infrastructure from rail to mains gas touches far fewer of the population than in other parts of Scotland. And in many ways, the impacts of climate change will fall most heavily on regions like mine. And when I see such enthusiasm around my region, from the great renewables project in the islands to the man in Lochaber wanting to change to an electric car but finding the infrastructure lacking, it's frustrating that the Scottish Government simply hasn't addressed how many of these issues will actually be addressed. Sadly, Scotland still has a government that promises big but delivers small. It has in the past served up a policy agenda that takes on the low-hanging fruit, while some of the biggest contributors to carbon emissions in our society are barely touched. It's a government that seems more interested in setting targets than meeting them. And it's a government that constantly tells us where the priorities lie elsewhere, while devoting endless time to its core issue, trying to break up the United Kingdom. A United Kingdom that, through our integrated network, has worked together and supported to the tune of billions of pounds the decarbonisation of our electricity sector, one of the biggest achievements Scotland has made in reducing emissions. Presiding Officer, the ambition and drive for change exist in this chamber. Ministers, however, must start being serious about how this target this chamber has voted for will become reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Halker-Johnson. I now call Angus MacDonald to be followed by Emma Harper. This is Mr MacDonald's final speech to the chamber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to contribute to this debate, serving on both the Clare and REC committees. And as you say, it is my final speech, so I would hope with your indulgence to sign off with a few words of thanks and farewell. And of course, I too send my best wishes to the Cabinet Secretary. So, since the 4 committee reports on the CCPU were published, it's been heartening to see the warm welcome they've received, with Fergus Bowden of Friends of the Earth Scotland describing the Clare report as excellent, and WWF Scotland broadly agreeing with the Clare committee findings. And while it's fair to say the committee findings and recommendations are tough or blunt, as Elizabeth put it, it's also fair to say that Scotland's net zero climate targets already in place show genuine global leadership in the run-up to the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow in November. So, turning to the reports themselves, there was clearly a bit of crossover between committees, and one example of that was industrial decarbonisation and NETs. Now, Clare's sister committee, the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee, covered that issue in some detail, as we heard from Willie Coffey earlier. However, that aspect was also covered by Clare, and as I have a constituency interest representing the industrial complex in Grangemouth, I'm keen to touch on that in a little detail. Now, we know that emissions from the industry sector have fallen by 45% since 1990, with much of that drop due to the disappearance of some major polluting industries. And we also know that the draft CCPU aims for a 43% reduction in industrial emissions between 2018 and 2032, which is considerably more than the 21% reduction set out in the 2018 Climate Change Plan. Now, a number of the funds have been announced to support this decarbonisation, as the Ministers alluded to, but it was clear from our evidence taking that the Scottish Government needs to better engage with the sector to ensure that all of the potential benefits are captured. Chris Stark of the CCC warned in evidence to our committee that with regard to negative emissions technologies and industrial decarbonisation, when it came to it, there's only really potential for 2 decarbonised industrial clusters in the UK. Therefore, he said, if Grangemouth wanted to benefit from funding and investment, then it would have to lean in to capture the lion's share of support. So it's clear with regard to Grangemouth, it is vital that the Scottish Government, along with industry and Falkirk Council, work to ensure that the town is recognised as a decarbonised industrial cluster. However, if Grangemouth is to benefit from UK Government funding and investment, then it does need to lean in to capture the lion's share of support to ensure it beats off a very real challenge from Teesside in England, which is the main internal UK competition. Our committee considers Scotland has significant advantage in terms of engineering expertise and geological storage for CCS, but it also has that very real competition from Teesside, which we ignore at our peril. So our committee explored with the Cabinet Secretary how Scotland can capture the economic and just transition benefits, and asked how important is it that Grangemouth sits at the heart of a low-carbon industrial transformation for Scotland, and what is being done to support this. Now, the Cabinet Secretary confirmed that the ACORN project should be seen as an anchor to enable the early establishment of CCS in Scotland, and stated that she considered Grangemouth to be a strategic industrial site that must be harnessed in the energy transition and act as a critical catalyst hub. I was pleased also to hear her acknowledge that that commitment would be required beyond the next parliamentary session, and also that private sector investment is necessary alongside Scottish and UK Government interventions. However, that said, it would be wrong not to acknowledge and highlight the concerns raised by a number of NGOs who are concerned about the CCPU's over-reliance on NETs. Now, there's much to cover, Presiding Officer, but I'm conscious of time, so as this is my final speech in the Chamber, I'm keen to say a few words of farewell. Many of you will know that I'm heading off to the land of my roots in the Outer Hebrides, and it'll be 29 years this year since I was first elected to the former Falkirk District Council. So clearly it's going to be quite a wrench to leave elected politics in Falkirk District. It's fair to say that for most of my life I've been torn between 2 parts of Scotland, Falkirk District and the Western Isles, and it's probably fair to say I've sacrificed a completely different life in the Hebrides for a life serving the people of Grangemouth initially, and latterly the whole of Falkirk East. But that's been my choice, and it's been an honour and a privilege to represent my electorate at all 3, at 2 councils and the Parliament. But the islands of the Hebrides have a habit of calling their sons and daughters back home, and I've succumbed to that call. My genes go back 1,000 years in the Hebrides, so I guess it was only a matter of time before I did succumb to the call to go home. But I'll never forget the absolute honour and privilege it's been to serve the people of Falkirk East in Parliament for the past 10 years, and the good people of Grangemouth and the council before that. Every day I walked into the Holyrood Chamber and the council chamber, it was never a chore. It was always an honour and a privilege. And I've never forgotten the people of the Old and Shire Ward in Grangemouth who put me on that path way back in 1992. So massive thanks go to my wonderful team in the constituency office. They don't call themselves Team Awesome for nothing. My office manager of 9 years, Diane, my caseworker, Lorraine, my press officer, Ian, and the new addition to the team, Kirsten, and of course all the other team members who have moved on to pastures new over the years. I'd also like to, at this point, make a special mention to all the committee clerks who I've worked with, and of course the Spice team, who are second to none, and of course each and every committee convener who I've worked with, who have been excellent conveners over the years, past and present. So you all know who you are. And of course, this job cannot be done properly without the support of family. So to my long-suffering wife, Linda, a massive thank you. And of course, the instant support of my mother over the years, who sadly passed away this time last year. But in closing, Presiding Officer, I've been pleased to be associated with and worked behind the scenes on many positive policies and legislation, not least my favourite bills, the land reform and community empowerment bills, the effective ban on fracking, and of course the deposit return scheme, which I've been banging on about to anyone who would listen since I first saw it operating in Norway in 1985. So there's much to be proud of, and as I head off into the Hebridean sunset, I'll watch with interest from afar as this Parliament continues to grow and becomes fully independent in the not too distant future. Presiding Officer, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr MacDonald. And can I say to members, obviously, when people are doing their last speeches, I'm relaxed about it, it's only fair, but not for the rest of you. So you have to keep to your 6 minutes, as I have no time in hand. And I call Emma Harper to be followed by Richard Leonard. And you mustn't take that personally, it's just a fact.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I don't take anything personally from you. It's always wonderful advice. I welcome the Scottish Government's update to the Climate Change Plan 2018 to 32, and I too wish Cabinet Secretary Roseanna Cunningham all the best of health. At the beginning of this Parliament session, I was a member of the Environment and Climate Change Committee, which I enjoyed very much, including with colleagues Angus MacDonald and Stuart Stevenson, and I enjoyed their final speeches this afternoon. And now, as a member of the Rural Committee, I would like to point to the committee's scrutiny of transport and agriculture in terms of climate change. Finding ways to tackle and address climate change clearly crosses many committees and many ministerial portfolios, as we are hearing this afternoon. And climate change is also an issue which I have been engaging on locally in my own work and as a member of the REC Committee. This update to the 2018 Climate Change Plan sets out bold actions which together chart our pathway to our new emissions reduction targets out to 2032. It sets out plans for a green recovery from the COVID pandemic and includes a number of actions, from expanding walking and cycling paths, which promotes active travel, and to other steps like supporting businesses to continue to support people working from home, which is having an impact on emissions reductions. It would be good to see the measurement of how much emissions have been reduced from people working from home during the pandemic, and also health professionals, which are now engaging in digital technology to do appointments, which also reduce car journeys as well. Our journey to emission reduction targets will not be easy, and it will need to be a truly national endeavour, with businesses, communities and individuals contributing fully. The plan update therefore gives clear signals of where we're going, what the Scottish Government is doing to enable us to get there, and how others can contribute. Presiding Officer, across Dumfries and Galloway in my South Scotland region, South Scotland Enterprise Agency has been pivotal both in supporting businesses and communities to recover from COVID-19. It's also supporting the region to meet climate change targets and to adopt green policies to mitigate impact of climate change. During the process of introducing the South Scotland Enterprise Bill, I was able to propose an amendment, number 25, which revised the language of the bill to incorporate current terminology in environmental legislation, providing better alignment with the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009 and with our government's climate change plan. In the agency's work since it commenced last year, SOSI has directly provided financial and practical support schemes to mitigate the impact of climate change, such as the grant of £1.9 million over 5 years to specifically designated UNESCO Galloway and Southern Ayrshire Biosphere. One aim of the biosphere is conserving and sustainably enhancing our southwest natural environment while encouraging sustainable development, outdoor access, hiking, mountain biking and other pursuits, which are also important to support better health while addressing climate change mitigating measures as well. I'd like the Minister to be aware that many constituents are hoping that the biosphere could be expanded to Stranraer and the Rins of Galloway, which could contribute to sustainable economic growth of tourism and a green recovery for the South West. And many constituents are also still interested in the potential of a Galloway National Park, with obvious climate change issues involved. Presiding Officer, Scotland has the most ambitious climate change legislation in the world, and the Climate Change Plan update it does set out the policies that will be introduced, boosted or accelerated to help us meet them and to support our green recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. The Climate Change Plan update makes a number of significant announcements to meeting Scotland's climate change targets, including a truly world-leading new target to reduce kilometres travelled by cars by 20% by 2030. And I know other members have mentioned this. Demonstrates our level of ambition in meeting Scotland's statutory targets. But I am aware of the REC Committee's work that the convener spoke about earlier in his contribution regarding evidence for achieving this 20% reduction. Investing £120 million in zero-emission buses, driving forward a decarbonised future for Scotland's bus fleet and supporting Scottish supply chains, and a new £180 million Emerging Energy Technologies Fund. These are all good goals that we have.
And there, on those good goals, you must conclude. It's 4-minute speeches.
Oh, I apologise. That's not what my understanding was. Presiding Officer, in conclusion,
no, Ms Harper, conclude means that. No wee extra bits. I call Richard Leonard, who followed by Claire Adamson, who's the last speaker in the open debate.
Thank you. As these committee reports make clear, and as witness after witness has attested to this Parliament, the Scottish Government's climate change plan lacks clarity, lacks transparency, lacks detail, lacks evidence, lacks a plan B. And in the Cabinet Secretary's absence, and I'm sorry that she's not here and I wish her well, but let me quote her. In her defence, she told the committee that the Scottish Government's climate change plan is not intended to be encyclopedic. Well, people are not expecting a 32-volume encyclopedia, but they are looking for a simple, honest, clear working plan that is credible, intelligible, and that is persuasive. Because in the absence of that, it is as if promises are made by the SNP government to the people with the full and certain knowledge that they will not be kept. It is as if a law enshrining targets, which was passed by this Parliament less than 2 years ago, has no intention of ever being implemented, let alone enforced, whilst the SNP is in office. It is as if these most serious questions of the future of work, the survival of the planet, of international and intergenerational equity, these questions of life and death itself, can be set aside. In its inquiry, the Eclair Committee heard of, and I quote, a significant implementation gap. And nowhere is this gap greater than in the government's lamentable record on jobs. So it's no use the First Minister announcing on the 1st of September a national mission to help create new jobs, good jobs, green jobs, if on the 3rd of December the jobs and communities around the BIFAB yards are abandoned. The latest chapter in a decade of failure, which the STUC has rightly characterised as broken promises and offshored jobs. Last year, as Scottish Labour leader, I commissioned a report on green jobs. It showed how we could recover jobs, retrain workers,
and rebuild businesses, by investment in green transport, in renewable energy and energy efficiency, in social and affordable housing, in a Scottish Conservation Corps, in a national care service, in recycling and waste management, in an active industrial and manufacturing strategy. All the evidence before us today, though, is that the current government relies too much on market mechanisms, technical fixes, and far too little on the role of the active state, which is precisely what we need as we recover from COVID. So we need a vision of a different kind of society and a different kind of economy. And for me, that means a fundamental change in the relations of power, the decentralisation of industry, the localisation of economics, the promotion of self-management and self-sufficiency, of cooperation, the humanisation of work, land reform, the creation of an active non-bureaucratic state, popular democratic planning involving businesses, workers and their trade unions with full employment at its heart. And I tell you that these changes are not only visionary, they are urgent. They are not only radical, they are realistic. And most important of all, they are not only necessary, they are possible.
Thank you very much, Mr Lennon. I call Claire Adamson, the last speaker in the open debate. Ms Adamson, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I also express my congratulations to those who have made their final speeches in the Chamber today. Very moving indeed. And send my best wishes to the Cabinet Secretary, who I was hoping would be taking part today. I have been a bit reflective. It's maybe partly to do with some of the wonderful speeches we have seen from people who are leaving. And as we near the end of the Parliament session and pay tribute to those that are retiring or leaving to do other things, I've been thinking about climate change and our knowledge of it. Climate variation has been known about since the 1700s. By the 1950s and 60s, we were aware of the behaviour of humans, fossil fuels, and aerosols were playing a part in this. And by the 1990s, where aerosol pollution had decreased, we knew carbon dioxide levels were showing greenhouse gases, making a global warming through the greenhouse effect a real threat to global future. Gillian Martin mentioned David Attenborough and his extensive career and activism, and he has informed us all of the impending global crisis over many, many decades. And as we move through the 1990s and into the new century, Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth was a seminal moment. And more recently, Greta Thunberg has captured the imagination and fostered activism in our young people who get it and don't accept it, and whose behaviour change has the opportunity to also change all our behaviours. Can I thank Willie Coffey, Gillian Martin, Edward Mountain and I'm missing someone there. Right, James Dornan, sorry, for their representation of the committee's work in this area today. It's been very diligent reports and hard work of the committees to respond to this. And it reminds us all that Scotland has the most ambitious climate change legislation in the world. The net zero emissions targets of 2045 and the interim targets of 75% by 2030, brought forward by Claudia Beamish, who I have to commend for her dedication to the environment throughout her parliamentary career and this session. These are world-leading, bold, ambitious and groundbreaking. Strengthened by the committee's hard work, have strengthened the climate change plan, which will see these implemented. The legislation was recognised by the United Nations Climate Summit in New York in 2019, when the Executive Secretary, Patricia Ianosa, said, "Congratulations, Scotland, for demonstrating bold leadership and climate action. This is an inspiring example of the level of ambition we need globally to achieve the Paris Agreement, and we look forward now to welcoming COP26 to our country later this year." I absolutely believe that the climate change legislation and the climate change plan are
probably the most important achievements of this session of the Parliament, and they couldn't have been achieved without the leadership and the work of Rosanna Cunningham. And I do think that we will look back on this as a moment where Scotland took the lead and will continue to take the lead in this area as we go forward. And I commend all our young people for their activism, for not letting this go, for reminding us each and every day how important this is for our future, but also for futures of everyone across the world. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Adams. Closing speeches. I call on Sarah Boyack to close for Labour. Ms Boyack, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. It's great for me to join today's debate as I'm the new Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform spokesperson for Scottish Labour. And I do want to thank my colleague Claudia Beamish for her excellent contribution to this debate today, and also for working with her in the run-up to COP26. I think this has been an excellent debate, and the 4 committees have made important recommendations, and there have been some excellent and passionate speeches today. And I hope the Scottish Government will listen to this debate. We need to meet our climate change targets. It's not enough just to have good targets. And the criticism from the committees is powerful, and it gives cross-party support right across the Parliament for more radical action to tackle our climate emergency. And the case that members have made today for wide-ranging, cross-cutting measures are incredibly powerful. Our local government committee concluded that decarbonising our existing housing stock had to be a key challenge in the update, but it also has to link into tackling fuel poverty. The draft heat and building strategy is an important step, but there are different challenges across Scotland. For example, Councillor Heddle from Orkney argued that we haven't seen support for heat pumps to date, which is a practical solution for rural communities, but it needs to be supported. Whereas in urban areas and cities, the challenge of heat networks means that councils will need support because of the complexity and risk-taking that's going to be required. But in Edinburgh, for example, we're now seeing the second phase of our Edinburgh Solar Co-op, a community-led co-op which uses our schools to create electricity and generate resources which are reinvested locally. But it took the best part of a decade for that co-op to get established, and we don't have that time now, so we need community projects across the whole country to be supported with the knowledge from our local councils. And if we're phasing out gas boilers in new homes in 3 years, then the work really needs to start now, and we need more support for how existing homeowners will be incentivised, especially, as Liam MacArthur said, in relation to tenements. Now, councils are critical in protecting us from the impacts of climate change already happening, such as flooding and the need for new green infrastructure to support adaptation measures. But at our committee, COSLA and individual council witnesses were absolutely clear that they need to be properly resourced and empowered to meet the climate change ambitions they have, with investment beyond national programmes. And they worry that the current levels of funding are not sufficient to meet the challenges that are set out in the targets. Now, in his introductory comments, the Minister mentioned pots of money today, but I think the long-term funding for both revenue and capital will enable councils to plan ahead, and we need a holistic approach right across the country. So we need a change of thought in terms of how funding is delivered. And in our committee session, the Royal Town Planning Institute made the point that we need to put planning at the centre stage in reducing emissions and giving people attractive, low-carbon connections between our homes, our schools, work and our shops. And one of the lessons of the pandemic has been that there's an appetite for safer walking and cycling right across age groups. But if we're going to deliver the aspirations that everybody loves of the 20-minute neighbourhood, that means joined-up planning, investment in new active travel networks, and much more affordable and accessible bus and rail services, and investment in low-carbon vehicles as well. And that point was made very effectively by Emma Harper and Edward Mountain earlier in the debate. I think there's a call for detail echoed right across the reports and for action. And while the update is only an update, it's not meant to be a full plan, I think the Scottish Government needs to listen tonight and to turn the targets into clear action plans. In Scottish Labour, we've been absolutely clear to call for bolder and more clear action from the Scottish Government to tackle the climate emergency. And it needs to be tied into the nature emergency as well. And we need to think about how we rebuild our economy after COVID-19. and think of the opportunities of joining up the different policy initiatives so that we tackle the inequalities the pandemic has exposed in our society. And Claudia Beamish was right to highlight the skills needed to give us an effective green recovery. So we should make sure we don't miss out on those who are unemployed or at risk of unemployment over the next few months as a result of the current crisis. Procurement is going to be absolutely critical. We spend £11 billion of public money in Scotland every year. That money needs to be leveraged to make sure that we purchase climate-friendly goods and, where there's no Scottish supplier, help existing companies diversify or create new supply chains, and link into the real living wage, recognise trade unions and reduce carbon footprint right across that procurement sector. But as Richard Leonard said, we also need to see private sector companies sourcing low carbon materials and prioritise manufacturing in Scotland. There's been a huge missed opportunity in the renewables we've seen across the country, but we're going to see renewables repowering over the next few years. So those new constructions need to see turbines built in Scotland, heat pumps built in Scotland, not just to help in our recovery from COVID, but to help us transition to a low-carbon economy. And that means a just transition. And as Richard Leonard said, involving trade unions in that transition and tackling inequalities. And finally, as Claudia Beamish noted, and I think almost everybody speaker, we're in the run-up to COP26, where we're going to see our climate targets broadcast as being world-leading, and they are world-leading. But we've got to showcase the steps we are taking to implement those targets, because the progress we've made thus far is not going to be fast enough. And as others have said, it's a real shame that Rosanna Cunningham is not able to join us today. But I am sure she will read the official report. And I hope that in our outbox as a minister, she has the recommendations of the 4 committees today and makes the recommendations to the next Parliament, because we need to act on these recommendations urgently if we're going to tackle the climate emergency.
Thank you very much.
Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call Maurice Golden to close for the Conservatives. 6 minutes, Mr Golden.
Always keep the time, Presiding Officer.
You heard it now.
We'll
keep an eye on the clock.
We'll wait and see. But I'd like to use some of that time to pay tribute to Angus MacDonald. We set up the Nordic countries CPG together, and I've enjoyed working with him, and I wish him well as he heads off to his Hebridean sunset later. Stuart Stevenson gave a typically entertaining and enlightening speech, his 852nd, if I heard correctly, and of course he's attended 110 virtual committee meetings. Well, I don't know how many I've got, but I knew that Stuart would keep things on track. I'd also like to refer members to my register of interests. I worked my notice period at Zero Waste Scotland almost 5 years ago. It seems strange to keep referring to it, nonetheless. I would also like to wish the Cabinet Secretary well in her retirement. I'm sorry that she cannot be here today. We may not always agree, and she does refer to me as a waste geek. But I can honestly say I've looked forward to our debates and questions, and I wish her all the best. Jamie Halcrow-Johnson outlined the challenges faced in rural areas with a lack of infrastructure, from rail to mains gas to electric vehicle charging points. And Liam MacArthur highlighted the need to improve the energy efficiency of our homes, both in rural and urban areas. Deputy Presiding Officer, my colleague Liz Smith hinted that I would have something to say about the circular economy, and she knows me well. In fact, I've spent the last 5 years in Parliament making the case for the circular economy, and for good reason. It is the mechanism by which we make climate gains permanent, the economy more sustainable, and the lives of our citizens fairer. Amidst the misery of this pandemic, it at least gives us an opportunity to build back better. The committee report contains a number of important recommendations on this front, such as bringing forward the next iteration of Scotland's economic strategy and prioritising a review of the circular economic strategy with a view to embedding it into the economic strategy. On that ground, there are also recommendations to expand the Zero Waste Scotland Circular Economy Investment Fund and invest in skills and training, both practical measures I welcome to spur on a green recovery and help reach net zero. Both goals would be helped by a circular economy bill to set out the framework for transitioning to a low-carbon economy, a view the committee shares, and I hope we see the bill early in the next parliamentary term. Deputy Presiding Officer, much of this work could be set in motion in time for the UK Government bringing COP26 to Scotland, as many speakers have mentioned, showing the assembled world leaders that Scotland can do more than just set targets. Because whilst I have always welcomed the SNP showing ambition to tackle climate change, the fact remains they often fail to deliver, such as their failed 2021 landfill ban. The SNP are burning waste as a stopgap measure until the ban hopefully materialises in 2025. The committee warn about the possibility of a reliance on incineration becoming embedded post-2025. Concerns well-founded, given the SNP are increasing incineration capacity by 400%, turning Scotland into the ashtray of Europe. And I'm delighted at the Labour U-turn announced today on energy from waste, and the fact that they are adopting the Scottish Conservative position announced in 2017 of a moratorium. It was only the Greens and the Scottish Conservatives that voted for my amendment earlier in this parliamentary term, and I'm delighted at that Labour U-turn. Moreover, the landfill ban is not the only one to be missed. Emissions, renewable heat, recycling, all are either set to be missed or set to fail. And of those, recycling is particularly bad. Not only is the current recycling rate of 44.9% far short of the 70% target set for 2025, it is actually going backwards. Scotland now recycles less than in 2016. Making matters worse, the SNP are now shipping 3 tonnes of waste a minute out of Scotland. Clearly, there should be an increased action further up the waste hierarchy with better support for reuse and repair. I agree with the committee there needs to be more details on this and also enhanced producer responsibility, all of which was outlined in my 2017 climate change paper. The lack of detail that permeates the climate change plan was outlined, with the committee warning that concerns have been raised over the credibility and achievability of the updated plan. Presiding Officer, it will be the task of the next Parliament to start and sustain a green recovery. Better use of public procurement, a centre for circular economy excellence, a launch of renewable energy bonds, building an electric arc furnace, a new plastic recycling plant to create green jobs, retain waste stream resources and build supply chain resilience. I hope they treat the report's recommendations with the urgency they deserve and start building the circular economy Scotland needs. Thank you.
Well done, well done. You did make it within the time. I knew you would. I now call Ben McPherson to close the Scottish Government. Minister, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you, colleagues, for what has been a very important and interesting debate, and for this opportunity to outline the steps the Scottish Government is taking to meet our emissions reduction targets and respond to some of the points raised. May I welcome Sarah Boyack to her position and commend the speech by Claudia Beamish, which I thought made some very important points. Also, Mark Ruskell will try and come to some of the points he raised shortly, as well as Liam MacArthur. But may I particularly pay tribute to Angus MacDonald in his last speech, and to Stuart Stevenson, who was a mentor to me and many of the new intake in 2016. And we're incredibly grateful for that, and also our admiration for everything you've achieved, but particularly the Climate Change Act 2009, which is behind much of the progress we've made until this point. Presiding Officer, the path ahead may present many uncertainties. The pandemic, technological advances, the limits of devolution, and the need to ensure a just transition. But our destination is clear, and that's come through today. We have a bright future before us in a society and economy that prioritises the environment and well-being of its people. That is the vision. And we will reduce the emissions and in a way that is fair and just to all, involving people and communities so that everyone can benefit from the widespread positive changes that lie ahead. By 2032, Through the actions outlined in the Climate Change Plan update, we will witness a profound transformation of our energy system. 100% of Scotland's electricity demand will be met by renewable sources, with the creation of secure and well-paid jobs and exporting surplus renewable electricity. Furthermore, Scotland will have benefited from the development of new pioneering infrastructure used for carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, green hydrogen production, which Mark Ruskell rightly highlighted, tidal and wave energy development and production in due course. Through these technologies, we will help us to ensure that we have a managed transition for Scotland's industrial sector. And one of the important points that Mark Ruskell raised in the debate, which he may have wanted to come in on there, is our learning by doing approach, which will be most important in terms of negative technologies. We are confident that it will be technologically possible to deliver large-scale installations by 2030. And as noted by Chris Stark, our statutory advisors, the Climate Change Committee, we know that these technologies will work. The question is how they work and will in reality in Scotland. Yes, Mark Ruskell, I will give way.
Mark Ruskell.
Thank the Minister for giving way. What happens if the negative emission technologies don't work?
Minister.
As I was just going to come on to, the arguments around the Plan B that have been raised, it's been suggested, including from Richard Leonard, that we should have a Plan B. But our process, designed by Parliament, ensures that regular monitoring and reporting means that should the need arise for a Plan B will be produced at the appropriate time. But we should not plan for technological failure now. We should pursue technological achievement. So, the transformation won't be limited to our energy system, though. Over the coming decade, there will be a step change in the way we travel and our landmark investment in public transport and active travel will support more sustainable transport choices, as well as the £1.6 billion of investment in heat and buildings, which will make homes better insulated, including in tenement housing, and I note the points raised on that, but also remove fuel poverty, increase energy efficiency, and improve the stock of all of our urban environments and rural housing as well. One of the key recommendations of our stakeholders, quite understandably, has been to prioritise nature-based solutions. We have heeded this call with boosted investments of £150 million over 5 years in forestry and a further £250 million in peatland restoration. And by 2032, 21% of the land will be covered by forest and over 250,000 hectares of peatland will have been restored. The agricultural sector, which was referenced by many, will support these and other changes in land use through further integration of woodlands and peatland on farms, while continuing the important role of food production. And farmers and crofters will adopt low-emission technologies and practices supported with the skills and tools they need to produce more sustainably. And over the period covered by the plan update, we will be well on the way towards a full circular economy designed to reduce, reuse and repair materials. And we are embedding circular economy principles into our green recovery, prioritising areas with the biggest opportunities: construction, agricultural, food and drink, reduction targets, and giving clear signals of intent to businesses, public bodies and individuals. Yes.
Maurice Golden.
I thank the Minister for giving way. The Minister mentions the circular economy. Can the Minister give his view on the use of biostabilisation as a treatment technique prior to landfill, as opposed to energy from waste?
Minister.
I don't have appropriate time capacity to come back on that point to Mr Golden now, but I will give him an undertaking to write to him in due course. As has been clear today, I've got time, I'm afraid.
The Minister is moving into his last minute.
A truly cross-government coordinated approach will be vital if we are to achieve this shared vision. And the plan update goes further than any of its predecessors in acknowledging that climate action must be embedded in our work across government, including our Climate Skills Action Plan, which is published alongside the plan, And looking ahead, we will also continue to build upon this approach of a whole government approach and ensure that tackling climate change continues to be a core priority for the entirety of the Scottish Government. The Climate Change Plan update is truly world-leading, Presiding Officer, both in terms of the targets it contains and the actions it commits to. We are confident that it provides a credible route map towards emission reduction targets, giving clear signals of intent to business, public bodies and individuals. The plan update demonstrates the pioneering approach to climate change that Scotland is renowned for, and its application is timely as we look to COP26. In my opening statement, I outlined plans to finalise the plan update. The global climate emergency requires immediate action, and we want to turn our focus to implementation. And I also outlined additional plans to take into account the further recommendations we have recently received and opportunities to build on our current policies in due course. So I'd like to thank members for the debate today and look forward to continuing to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I call on Finlay Clarkson to close for the Clare Committee. Deputy Convener, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. As Deputy Convener for the Clare Committee, I welcome the opportunity to close for the committee's recent report on the updated climate change plan. I'd like to thank the associated committees for their work and conveners for their contribution today, and echo comments of others in the Chamber regarding a huge amount of work carried out by the committee clerks, SPICE and stakeholders. And given this will be the last committee debate for some, I would like to recognise the constructive and mostly consensual outcomes delivered by the Clare Committee, not only in relation to the climate change, but right across the portfolio over the last 5 years. I wish retiring members well, but I must mention that I did particularly enjoy the drams and banter with Angus MacDonald at the end of the day on our field trips. I do pass on my good wishes for a speedy recovery to our ever-present, until now, Cabinet Secretary Rosanna Cunningham. Indeed, recognise, as others have done, her considerable contribution to addressing the climate emergency. Maybe we should add a middle name, Rosanna Pete Cunningham, in honour of her commendable success in persuading the Finance Secretary to invest record levels of funding in peatland restoration, and I sincerely wish her well in her retirement. This report is not only of importance to our committee, but right across the majority of Cabinet Secretary and committee remits. And it's clear that we need to move forward with clear and decisive actions that need to be set out in the final plan. A plan that every sector and community and individual can trust will deliver outcomes that we so desperately need to reverse the threat that climate change brings to our very existence. It needs to be a climate change plan like no other. And in the words of Jim Skia, the co-chair of the IPCC, the message is that, frankly, the scale of changes that will be needed in the emission pathway has no precedent in human history. There is no precedent for the rate of emission reduction and the change in social and technological systems that will be required. That message is stark, but in response, this Parliament put in place a legislative framework with hugely ambitious targets, which can deliver significant emissions pathway changes. And we need to act now, going further and faster. Indeed, the Scottish Government planned to finalise the update before recess, and while swift action to finalise the updated plan is welcomed, the committee would seek assurance that their recommendations will be taken into account in the final updated plan. In her contribution, Liz Smith mentioned Chris Stark of the CCC, who described some of the Scottish Government's ambitions as being on the fringes of credibility. And I also agree that much of the evidence we took as a committee suggested that might well be the case. However, the Scottish Government are not wrong in having highly ambitious targets, but they need to address many of the concerns we've heard over their delivery. The Minister touched on some of the issues set out in the report, but one topic of importance was the negative emissions policy. I would like to ask, are the estimates of the efforts that we can achieve from negative emissions, are they simply there to balance the books in light of other policies not coming up and reaching the targets? Because we don't know that. We need further information on how the figures on negative emission policies have been arrived at. Indeed, concerns were raised about the clarity regarding the modelling and baseline information which underpins how emission envelopes have been determined, and we still question if the Times model is fit for purpose. We need to know how policies and proposals deliver the envelopes presented for each sector, and the rationale for agriculture and industry to be protected from the additional abatement to allow Parliament to scrutinise progress and ensure that all sectors are well positioned for net zero opportunities in the future and not disadvantaged. Land use was a topic which appeared regularly, throughout our evidence sessions. And the basis of our recommendation 56 is that we must appreciate that land is a finite resource and the final CCP must take an integrated approach to agriculture and land use change and forestry, recognising the role of farmers and other land managers in delivering emission reductions in both emission envelopes. To achieve that, we must see an accelerated rollout of regional land use partnerships, including the tools and resources available, including, as John Scott raised, knowledge transfer, to ensure that agriculture can continue to play its role in leading the way towards low-carbon land management and at the same time benefiting from the innovation and cost savings it will inevitably bring. There are considerable opportunities for nature-based solutions such as woodland creation, peatland restoration, management of invasive non-species to form part of a green recovery package. And the committee recommends the Scottish Government's economic recovery plan explicitly includes support for a nature-based solution to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The committee considered there is a significant opportunity in redesigning Pillar 1 agricultural payments to be consistent with the objective of supporting a green, just and resilient recovery and reward existing good practice. But there was recognition that the Scottish Government must come forward with these plans far quicker than they have done up to now. The committee supports the inclusion of natural assets and natural capital in Scotland's definition of infrastructure, leading to a fundamental rethink of how decisions are made on capital allocation. We recommend that the Scottish Government fully incorporate natural capital and an understanding of natural assets into the investment decision framework being developed in advance of 2025. There's much work to be done, but we should take comfort in the fact there is cross-party determination to achieve the ambitious targets that the Parliament set. The legacy report from the Clare Committee will set out the hugely important role that the committee, which takes on the responsibility of addressing climate change emergency in the next session of Parliament, whether that's the existing Clare Committee or a new bespoke climate committee, that there is a target to lay the draft fourth CCP in Parliament no later than the end of 2023 to ensure that there's sufficient time for consultation with stakeholders and in Parliament on the draft plan, which takes the views into account and then finalises the plan by the end of 2024. Deputy Presiding Officer, our children and our children's children are putting their trust in us to deliver. We cannot fail them.
Thank you very much, Mr Carson. And that concludes the debate on the climate change plan. And a point of order, Mr Mountain.
I wonder, Presiding Officer, if you could help me how I could correct the official record that I mentioned 6 people on the REC committee who were standing down and failed to mention Mike Rumbles, which was an error on my behalf. And I would like to get the record corrected, Presiding Officer.
Yes, it's not a point of order, but your point has been made, and Mr Rumbles, I'm sure, will be eternally grateful. We now have a short pause before we move on to the next item of business.